Welcome back. Welcome back to the Detroit is Different podcast studios. I'm Kari Frazier hosting this, and I got somebody that definitely is from this neighborhood, to say the least. So if people know about this neighborhood, Russell Woods is where the West Side Cubs stay and play, but so much more of that. He is the city council member for District 7, but right now a mayoral candidate and has a very unique Detroit story. So, Fred Durhal III, how are you today?
I'm good, my brother. How you doing? Thanks for having me.
Oh, man, this has been in the making for a while. You've been in studio before, but this is the first time you in seat on show.
That's right. That's right. Listen, and the studio is looking nice, man. Really proud of what you're doing over here and what you've been doing for so many years, man.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You actually came in with, like, you all see the what's going on here. It's not conjuring, just switching up the board's play. And we doing some different things at Detroit is Different, hence staying in the mix with that. And we always start these Detroit is Different with the root story. And I know you definitely know a lot of that root story from your family that's been connected here for a long time. But let's really unpack that. Your family in Detroit, what brought them up this way and how many generations deep?
Yeah, so, we came here from my grandfather, who moved from Macon, Georgia. They end up moving to Youngstown, Ohio, where he met a beautiful young lady, my grandmother at the time. And then they had their first of 12, which is my dad.
Wow.
My grandfather was a union worker for Penn Railroad Station. And obviously my grandmother was, as they would put, a homemaker, but she was so much more, a PTA
you
president.
Said 12 kids. I mean,
yeah. I mean,
that's a heck of a home you make it. That's a full basketball team.
Listen, they would say my grandmother, man, she was a bad sister, as they would say. She could feed a family of 12 with one pot of spaghetti. But she was a PTA president, as well as a president of a block club, not too far from here, Lothrop. My entire family went to Northwestern. That's on my dad's side. And very known throughout the community, particularly here on this west side. Obviously, with 12 kids, that reach goes out very far.
I would imagine.
Yeah,
I would
absolutely.
imagine, especially with a name like that. It's not like Williams or Jenkins or Johnson or Smith. And no offense to anyone with those last names, but a Durhal last name, that's...
Yeah, it's a little bit different. A little bit different. A lot of folks say, are we foreign, or, where does that name come from? But that's on my dad's side. On my mom's side, my grandfather was from Chattanooga, Tennessee, and moved up here to Michigan. My grandmother, interesting story on my mom's side. She was the child of a Irish woman and a field hand.
Wow.
At the time. And what happened was, obviously, the field hand, quote unquote, and my great grandmother got together and had my grandmother, and then obviously he had to flee.
I would imagine that, that is a dangerous situation. We often hear about the fears and the horrors of what enslavement did to our people, often in the lens of the Benjamin Franklin, our ex-president, and the way they paint the Sally Hemings story is from they had this romance, and to just know that power dynamic, and is seen from men to women, but that also existed often between women to men as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. At that time he was helping on a farm in Holly, Michigan. And so they basically ran away together. And my grandmother, obviously grew up, then met my grandfather. And my mother is one of 12 children.
Wow.
So I come from a very huge family. My dad's family, side of the family on the east side, or the west side, I'm sorry, and my mom's family on the east side. All of them went to Denby High School. So very good mix. And then my parents met, and the rest is history. But We've got deep roots in this community, deep roots here in the city of Detroit. And what led me into public service were those roots. My dad being an assistant to Mayor Coleman Young back in the day and working for so many other politicians.
So I definitely want to unpack a little bit more of this family rooted story before we get to your father that definitely served as a public official himself.
Yeah.
So let's start around that root of you answered a lot of questions that I would naturally go to about what communities and what neighborhoods. And in those neighborhoods, a lot of the people. But now let's get into some of those personalities that brought them there and how they functioned. Youngstown, Ohio, on up to Detroit. It was the steel work that brought that transition?
Yeah, so my grandfather got an opportunity to work for railroads here. And they eventually, my dad was born actually in Rochester, New York. So they migrated there for a moment. He was born there. They stayed there till he was about 1 year old. And then obviously Detroit at the time was the place for opportunity for jobs, right? And so my grandfather on my father's side, that's when they decided to move here, and they started and raised the rest of their family again, added 11 other children there. My grandfather, by way of Chattanooga, Tennessee, when he moved up here, from what we hear, it was a lot about opportunity as well. My grandfather on my mother's side actually used to work with the Salvation Army back in the day. So, providing public service and helping others. And so, when you hear that story about the roots, I think, the key component and the similarity between both sides of my family is that they moved to Detroit for opportunity.
And also, after opportunity is found, public service naturally connected. You talk about PTA, you're talking about Salvation Army, and then being in a block club at a time where I'm seeing the organizations, they're functioning different because of the tone at the time. So I'm just thinking to myself, Black woman leading a parent-teacher association in that era, especially around that community of, as I'm gonna call it, shout out to Yusef Bunchy Shakur with just been moved into that ED position at Michigan Roundtable.
Shout out.
Zone 8, because I went to Northwestern too. So that's kind of what I call that area, most definitely, because that's what it was when I was cutting teeth over that way. But it's feeling different and looking different.
Yeah.
All of this, and also your father being an oldest child, what were the stories that you hear about that community and that neighborhood and how it functioned? What was the culture? What was the personality?
That's a very rich, and when I say rich, I mean family oriented, wealthy and family and love and principle and morals in that community. They all, my family grew up off of Lothrop Street, right over there. And a lot of folks at that time, some of the greatest folks in the history of the city of Detroit came from Northwestern High School. I don't just say that because you're a graduate. I know that's a big ups. I know
on the chart of Northwestern graduates, I'm probably somewhere in the third or fourth page. But it's some amazing people on page 1 through 3.
Well, here's the thing: when you think about it, right, and you talk about what era we are in around that neighborhood, particularly. You're talking about a high school that John Conyers graduated from. You're talking about a high school that Damon Keefe graduated from, that Willie Horton graduated from. And my dad, at the time, he was at Northwestern High School when Willie Horton was around. So, but it was a very family-oriented neighborhood, right? Folks, everybody knew each other, right? Everybody knew each other's family. Everybody, was more connected. And we don't see that so much nowadays. Obviously that neighborhood has changed, but I think it was just a great sense of community. My grandmother being a PTA president, she helped when the new McMichael Middle School was built and the new Northwestern.
Let's talk a little bit about just what role at that time, because from my hat of being the president of Northwestern, alumni association for so long, about 10 years myself, even though I'm so young myself. But in that, you learn a whole lot about the old NO and the new NO, as they call it, which now is an older building, but the infrastructure, the structure of it, what was happening. And this is all still down the street from Motown.
That's right.
As well. It's not a museum at the time. It's Motown Records.
It's the hub for music, incubator for music and the sound of America at that time, right? And so that whole community, that whole area, that the boulevard, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was really booming. You saw tons of black businesses over there. Brazelton's flower shop is still over there today. Shout out to them.
Mm-hmm.
Motown wasn't a museum, but it was a house, right? Where folks were making hits just like in a house. It was really a really rich community for blacks in that time.
So this, especially with that many uncles and aunties, and obviously your father, how do you think that played out in their ideas and understanding of how a community functions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it played out in a way where it spoke to the foundation of a community. The foundation of a community are families, right? When you have like 12 children of the same family who have either graduated or going to the same high school, folks know that family in that community, right? And so family is the foundation of the community. The way it played out again is that families were connected. Families communicated. They knew each other. They worked together in a collaborative way at the time. Things were a lot safer because folks understood each other, I think, a little bit better. They were less disconnected. And it created just a great community, just a rich environment where folks could grow up, right?
And then you take this whole other side of town, East Side, Denby, DB, and that's like, when I think of it, like the edge of the East Side almost.
Yeah.
But what was happening and functioning in that family structure that you've heard from those stories then from your parents there?
Yeah, so I mean, even on that side of town, man, the East Side was different, always different from the West Side, right? I'm a West Sider by heart. Shout out to the West Side Cubs too, man. Played at McKay Field. I remember growing up over here, Broad Street Parade, everything, right? That's my neighborhood. But the East Side was a little different. My family on my mom's side, they grew up, and you're talking close to 12 children that grew up off of Meldrum Street. And they did not grow up in the best of circumstances as well. And it was often funny, a lot of them went to Denby High School, and my mom's side of the family, very fair-skinned and obviously light-skinned, as they say, or light-skinned as they say. At a time, where Denby was starting to become more populated with black students.
And that's the other key that I hear so much in these Detroiters difference about some of the schools, and when a lot of the color barriers would be broken. In Northwestern and Central, some of the first high schools, period, are breaking those barriers earlier than some of these schools, definitely deep east. So you think about the Finney and the Denby, that's, you're almost dealing with, I mean, it's not the Ruby Rose situation per se, but it's still what you doing in this class.
Yeah, and they grew up in a different situation, right? As those schools became, as folks would say, more integrated, there were more black students attending, my mom's side of the family being a little bit more fair skinned, folks were like, well, hey, are you black or are you white? Are you guys Indian? Like what are you guys? And so, you face, or they face, should I say, a different environment. But they were, they rolled together, as a clan, man. That, they were all together. And very close. Both sides of my family families they're very close because they went through struggles as a large family would have. You know, I got 2 kids myself. I can't imagine having 10 more.
Yeah, especially in this era,
No,
you can't fathom it.
no.
So now that brings you to you growing up. What neighborhood do you grow up in as a kid?
Yeah, so interesting story. I grew up most of my life in the second half adolescence in Russell Woods. So, you know, from the age of about 10 or 11. The first part of my childhood, I grew up on the east side of Detroit. A lot of folks don't know.
Wow, where at?
I grew up on Ashland Street. So it was a block away from Alter Road, you know, the dividing line between Detroit and Grosse Pointe. We had a canal in our backyard. So I grew up on that part of the east side, went to Guyton Elementary, left there, and then did not want to go to Remus Robinson. So I went to Spain Middle School. Shout out to Spain. Spain. Oh yeah, man. Come on. Best band in the land too.
You played for Spain?
That's another story about me, man. If we had more time, I'm into music, man. You know, but then we moved as we went to Spain, then we moved back to the west side. Right. And when we moved back to the west side, we moved into Russell Woods right before I became a teenager. I was a preteen.
What do you remember about that east side community and growing up out there near Alter Road and the culture back then?
It was rough a little bit. You know, I'm an 80s baby, born in 1984. And we were growing up in that era, kind of going into the 90s, where we started to really see the effects of the crack epidemic that hit Detroit so hard. You know, East Side was a little bit difficult over there. You know, you had a lot of gangs over there at that time. You know, Devil's Night was what they call it at that time, was a real thing. So you saw a lot of burning of the houses. You know, we're not that far from Mac and Chalmers and Mac and Bewick over in that area. So, you know, it wasn't a supremely rough, you know, neighborhood per se, but it had a lot of challenges, right? And I remember the environment over there still being, again, founded by families there. And there were families in those homes. Some struggled a lot more than others, right? But it was an interesting time over there. East Side is definitely different. My experiences on the East Side growing up were definitely different than my experiences on the West Side growing up.
So Spain, one of the flagship institutions, and then for everybody, I had some kindergarten at Spain myself. So so definitely touch base there. Didn't go to the band program, but you actually touched into that band. What was that like, and what do you think as a child learning an instrument has to do with even how you approach a lot of life and problem solving today?
Yeah, man, I can tell you, you know, music, I tell folks a lot of time, music saved my life, right? Kind of even in an indirect way. I started playing the trumpet. That was my first instrument. I started that out in Guyton Elementary. And then went to Spain. And you've been to Spain before. You know, the band is the thing at Spain. Shout out to Miss Miller, who was our band director. It got really deep into music, got really deep into the marching band. And one of the key things that I took from music, which is, you know, so much of who I am, is that music encourages discipline, right? Music encourages being able to experience different cultures and embrace different cultures. But music, you know, also is communication, right? We might all speak different languages or different dialects, but I have not ran across any culture that doesn't utilize rhythm or music, you know, in a certain type of way. And it's one of those languages, man, that, you know, transcends cultures and has the ability to connect us. And so, you know, I love music in every form. I'm not a big country music fan. I got to tell you that. I might listen to a couple of songs. But other than that, man, you know, very eclectic, you know, whether it's opera, whether it's hip hop, whether it's classical, whether it's jazz. Not a super big smooth jazz fan, but I'll listen to it, right? I'm telling you, man, music really saved my life in so many ways because I never was really thinking about the streets. You know,
Hmm.
I was thinking about my music. You know, I was thinking about how I can stay active and then connect with others who shared some of the same love for music that I did.
Okay. And also, brothers and sisters
Yeah,
for you.
brothers and sisters. So I'm the second eldest of six.
Hmm. So
Um,
you, it's a good amount of y'all too.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
a good amount of us. You
y'all
know,
like y'all a 3-on-3 full team,
yeah.
full court.
Four boys, two girls. You know, I have an older brother. Then it's me. I'm the second eldest. Right under me is my brother, Brian. And then I have sisters who are twins.
Hmm.
And then I have a younger brother
Hmm.
now who is a teenager now, big fella now.
Okay.
But yeah, you know, I love my siblings, man. Um, you know, they are uh, one of the reasons kind of why I do what I do sometimes too, you know.
Break that down.
So, you know, when you come from a big family, like you look at my dad's side of the family, my mom's side of the family, obviously they grew up in different times where folks were still busy, but it's a little bit different being busy nowadays, right?
Mhm.
And you may not be you might not talk every single day because everybody's doing their own thing. But when I say, you know, they're one of the reasons I do what I do, they're always in my mind. Like when I make decisions, you know, at the council table or even when I was a state rep, I always think, you know, about them or
Hmm.
things that they have said and advice, you know, they have given, particularly because, you know, out of all six of us, only two of us really are kind of interested in politics,
Hmm.
right? So I always think about them, but they're different in so many ways that a lot of that has fed into who I am to be, you know, accepting of how folks choose to do things. Like my brother,
Mhm.
I think is one of the dopest poets I ever met.
Hmm.
You know, my brother right under me went and served in the military
Hmm.
and came home, and he's into, you know, tech. He likes country music, you
So
know,
there go the country
but
music in the family.
he likes serving in hospitality,
Hmm.
right? And he's very versatile, but very, you know, outgoing. You know, my sister Brianna, who used to be a planner for the city of Detroit,
Hmm.
is now in the nonprofit sector. My sister Bianca, under her, works in the healthcare field, and my younger brother making it through high school right now is just that new generation of children, man, that are interested in games and they're interested in coding and they're interested in all of these other things that, you know, some of these things that we didn't have when we were younger. So, you know, I look at it and you're able to get from your siblings, you know, your blood, you're able to get a different perspective about so many different ways of life. So when I'm making decisions that affect folks throughout this city or this state at one time, you know, I always thought about them. You know, how would this affect my sister, my brother, or even my cousins or
Hmm.
whoever that is, my family?
Yeah, and you definitely have a large family if you start including cousins. I can only imagine.
Oh man, oh man, like, we got a cousin league. Is, you know how they say
Yeah,
that you have a team? No, it's like a
it's a
league, man.
whole conference.
Yeah, man. So I think, you know, um on my dad's side, my grandmother had over 26 grandchildren, and then
Mm.
on my mom's side, over 24 grandchildren.
Wow.
And then you start multiplying the number of children that they have, and
Yeah.
it's just a thing, man. It's a huge thing. So they definitely took that saying, being fruitful and multiply. They took that to heart, man.
Hmm.
But it's a good thing. Family's a great thing.
So now let's get into that same lens in that family and growing up. Um, so your father's working with Coleman Young,
Yeah,
uh, and many appointees of Coleman Young wear that as a badge of honor and what that meant, which I'm sure that definitely impacts your path. And right now, your current run for mayor.
yeah.
What was it like from a child's view? What do you remember about his time with Coleman Young and what it meant to you, your family? Like, how did you even conceptualize this as a child?
Man, I'll tell you, it meant so much. Um, I had a moment when I brought my 2-year-old son down to KMAC,
Mm,
a city county building. And he walked in there and he was just running around, right? It was kind of nostalgic in a sense because I can remember being a kid running around there myself,
mm.
right? Going down there with my dad, having the ability to sometimes sit in those meetings, with Mary Young, being able to be around Mary Young at a early age. And I remember being just a young man saying, man, that is like the most powerful black man that I know.
And
Right.
you recognize the gravity
Oh
of
yeah.
this even as a child.
Absolutely, because my dad recognized the gravity. You know, when my dad went to work for Coleman Young, my dad told my grandmother he was going to start working for Coleman Young, and at first it was for free because he was volunteering on one of his campaigns.
Mm.
And like any great mother would say, "You ain't working for free. You need to go make some money." And uh, my dad worked for Coleman. That turned into a position when obviously Coleman was mayor, and my dad ran neighborhood city halls, two, one on Ford and Schaefer in Southwest Detroit, and one on Mack and Chalmers on the East Side.
And I want to unpack just at this
Yeah, yeah.
moment. No, I want to put this in the mix of neighborhood city halls were very big. In my interview with Dan Aldrich, to talk about East Side,
I
like
know
Mac and
Dan.
B
That's my
with. So
guy.
shout out to Mr. Aldrich, definite OG in community. Another person that ran one of the neighborhood city halls, and similar to what we see with the neighborhoods department. At one point in time, the neighborhood city halls were different structures throughout the city where residents could go and deal with, do I want to say like minimal city services? Well, city services that may be more abundant in certain neighborhoods, and like just more common based city services. So it was a way to engage with the public.
Yeah.
But it also, such as like your father and a Dan Aldrich, appointed a lot of people into positions of leadership throughout the city of Detroit. I believe Bernard Parker and
Oh yeah.
let's see, let me think of man, I'm tapping into my Detroit is different mind. Bernard Parker, how did I forget? Paul Taylor, shout out Paul Taylor.
Paul Taylor.
And others were in these positions and appointments to interact and also be a way to engage with the public.
Oh yeah. Neighborhood city halls, man, I think was such an important component. You're gonna hear me talk about this on the campaign trail of really bringing that feel back.
Hmm.
I remember again being a little kid, being around my dad and constituents coming in from Southwest Detroit. And whether it was just talk about environmental issues at the time or trash not being picked up at the time, those folks who ran those neighborhood city halls, it was like gold because some folks, even though Coleman Young was a very accessible mayor, right? They may not have had the opportunity to really have as much access, to a mayor, which happens, right? But to have access to someone who is with the mayor, walking and talking with him pretty much every day was huge for those communities. So they provided resources and a connection to every city department, where you didn't have to go down to the city county building for every single thing, where you could have the ability to get some of those resources and constituent issues resolved. My favorite times being in a neighborhood city hall down there was I used to hop in my dad's old Plymouth Aries. That was the city car back in the day.
Okay.
And around the time, for real, man, I remember that box car. But I remember them, and this is a favorite memory of mine, although it was, devastating, let me say that. But when they used to put the orange light on the car, and I used to go with him every single Devil's Night and patrol the neighborhoods to make sure folks weren't burning our city down.
So you uplift a couple things. And before I even get from there, let me shout this out, because I often uplift that sometimes the district managers is something that has come about now under Mayor Duggan's reign to implement that again. And sometimes the structure and the functionality of it, I think, can usurp what I would feel like is some understanding of how community can interact with city council. And this is a Kari Frazier opinion. All right, let me say that. But also with that, wearing a West Side Cub shirt, shout out to Kim Tandy. I think my D2 district manager is amazing. Kim Tandy is like life in my community. The work that she's done and that commitment and being there for forever are amazing. It's just sometimes I think like the functionality of it, as I've said in some community meetings where being that the district manager has more access to executive power, and oftentimes residents are speaking to executive things, and then a city council member will be sitting there connected to what's happening from a legislative perspective. It can get confusing for residents. That's why I think it can work and coincide a whole lot more. I mean, you're a council member now, so I don't even know if you want to speak to this.
No, I mean,
but I sometimes I've seen it a couple of times,
yeah,
and I'm always the one waving the banner of saying like, okay, technically, from the council position, it's a lot within the budget and legislation. Are you reading the ordinances and how things interact and engage? So most of what you want to ask for will be with your manager, but it's sometimes I felt like left a couple council members in places where they look like toothless. And it's like that's just not the structure of the way that the city of Detroit is chartered through the state of Michigan.
Yeah, what I would say is that it really depends on the relationship you have. So, like the district managers, and this is speaking from my perspective. Other council members may feel different, but the relationship I have with my district managers is a great working relationship, right? I'm under the firm belief of someone who has worked on the other side of being an office manager when my dad was a state rep and worked in constituent services before, is that people don't care who solves the problem. They only care that the problem gets solved. And a lot of times when we get caught up in the bureaucracy, we get caught up in, this is this person's responsibility, or, I contacted this person and this person didn't follow back. You get lost in the minutia. You get lost in all of the other stuff that really doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is resolving that constituent issue. So I like the Department of Neighborhoods. I think it's necessary. I think that connection with district managers are necessary because really all that they are those neighborhood city hall managers that provided those resources.
Very much so.
But it's different from them being in pretty much a brick and mortar, even though a lot of them have brick and mortars.
Yes.
But what I would say is, I think oftentimes folks want to clearly define who does what. And, as a member of the Detroit City Council, you are a legislator. Your primary job, as prescribed by the charter, is to ensure that our budget is balanced, that we are creating laws or ordinances that comply with our charter, which is our Constitution, and then, definitely comply with state law and federal law, and to be able to have an outlet and be the voice of those folks in the districts now that you serve, and express what they want to see through legislative initiatives. Now, it sounds simple, and I served on the state level and the city level. I could tell you, we did a lot of constituent services when I served as a state rep. I mean, that, we still came back. I didn't stay in Lansing that often. I used to come back every night to still go to the community meetings because there is a need where you still have to get issues resolved, even though you're quote unquote a legislator. But I think if you bridge the gap between the executive branch, which is their job, which is to execute, right? All of the city departments fall under the executive branch. You bridge that gap, you get better services for residents. I can speak for me, though. I operate in a different fashion as well, even as a legislator. Yes, I trust my district managers, but I don't bring the constituent issues from my office to the district manager unless to see if they had already been in contact with a constituent. We build our own individual relationships with the department heads, right? I empower my community liaisons to have those same relationships. That way, you're able to get instant results to constituent complaints, if possible, right? Without having to go through so many different levels. Folks hate when you call and say, "Hey, I've got an issue with my water." And they say, okay, we need you to call this number. And then you call that number and then they transfer you to somebody else. And then now it's transferred to somebody else and somebody else. After, a certain amount of time, a resident is frustrated. Why do I have to talk to 6 different people
Yeah.
to get one issue resolved?
Very much so. And especially in a neighborhood like mine, Hope Village Revitalization. Shout out to all my people in Hope Village. It can be overwhelming upon everything being overwhelming, just so many of the things that happen at Function. So how you engage with local politics kind of also comes back to even our understanding of it. And that kind of moves up the chain to federal politics too and statewide politics and people's understanding. My mother that graduated from Central High School in 67, she had a local civics class. Local civics is just something that's not commonly found. We're going to do a series of different tutorials, as I did some years at the last election cycle. And I'm going to do another series of those same videos, working with some other people helping me with that, because that information is usually a lot more hearsay. And getting the information and then also having that same understanding where I don't even necessarily know if a lot of people know the relationship between city and state.
Yeah.
In the cities, that so much of like, well, we have to go to the state house because the city is an entity of the state.
That's right.
Hence, the state is an entity of the United States. So like these relationships all matter depending upon what needs to function and happen. And it's those gaps and people feeling heard, but that understanding and being heard all mixed together. That's why I tip my hat to you and many other people that are in the position of politics, because my thought process is I don't necessarily know if people are aware, the job of what's happening. It'd be like you're the most effective basketball player ever, but it's the and one era and they just want to see you cross somebody over.
Yeah, it don't work that way. You might be traveling. So I'm a huge basketball fan. Shout out to the Detroit Pistons right now.
Oh yeah.
But also shout out really quickly to your mom.
Oh, rest in peace. My mom, yeah, definitely.
I knew her very well.
Mm-hmm.
Miss Frazier, who was a staple in Russell Woods, part of the Russell Woods Sullivan Association. I had a lot of contact with her when I was a state rep. In that area. Obviously, I grew up over there. Shout out to your pops too, who was over there. She was a very educated community leader. And with that comes power, right? You may run into the average resident and sometimes they don't know what's going on in Lansing. Your mom, and I'm using her as an example, was somebody that knew what was going on in Lansing. And she would ask about legislation that even if I didn't introduce or the Democratic caucus didn't introduce or somebody from the western side of the state that a lot of folks may not know in their state rep, she was up on a lot of that. And that spoke to being a concerned citizen. But I do think, to your point, education on these issues, is important. One of the things that I've done and we've done for a while now, even when I was a state rep, we hold policy sessions where we teach political education. In fact, I got one coming up this upcoming Monday.
Okay. This will be after that, but let's talk about what's going to happen in this session and what will be delivered.
Yeah. So this policy session, let me tell you, is this particular one, we'll be talking about the city budget. And we go through what the city budget is. I mean, we start from a granular level, right? We teach folks about what the budget is, how it's related to the charter, what's our current budget, How much of our budget is restricted funding? How much is not? What are some of the biggest pots of money in our budget? How does a budget function? What is the process? What is the timeline? And provide education on that. But we've done that with topics of the Detroit City Charter. We went over the U.S. Constitution. We went over the state constitution. We went over all three branches of government. We go over just maybe some hot button issues that may come, like, hey, how does a water department function? What is GLEWA? What is an authority? What is housing? We did some on housing and how housing works and how money flows from the federal government to the state and then to cities or local municipalities. And so, we started those courses because I remember I had just got elected, and I had a disagreement with a constituent at the time, who was telling me that my job was to do something that I needed to do. Like, this is your job. This is what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, part of the role.
And I got thick skin and tough skin. And even at times you can agree to disagree. Sometimes I still respect what a constituent says because that's my boss. Right? Those are my bosses. But I remember her saying at the time, she said, well, you know what? I'm going to hold you accountable. And I was just thinking, like, to myself, I'm like, man, does she really know?
Back to, like I say,
what that means?
Back to, like I say, if I'm trying to get the ball in the basket, but you want me to cross him over.
Right.
And I have this empathy for all politicians.
Yeah.
And also in this, what I'm doing plays a role too.
Oh, no doubt.
I'm not even going to call it like, it's so funny. It's like I was at a forum talking about misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation.
Yep.
And I don't even want to get into all the family in that, but it's less even any forms of that and more so just what people feel and what people know. We recently, and you were a guest on Detroit Next, and we recently got a segment up with another guest, and it's catching a lot of discussion points from other things that have happened. And I feel like, wow, I have to lead this here because it's the public discourse, but I don't think this is the context in which people are saying this. But, you got to let the people have their forum.
Yeah, you let the people have their forum. And, I think what's lost nowadays is, it's on both sides. So sometimes elected officials, our skin is not that tough, right? And you got to realize that when you take on this job, you gotta be able to swallow a lot of things that you may not agree with. But you got to do your best to understand a person's perspective of where they're coming from. On the flip side of the coin, I think as folks who are not elected, there are some folks who think you are supposed to be Superman or Superwoman and be able to wave a magic wand and make everything happen. They feel like if they're frustrated, they're supposed to be able to unload all of their feelings, off of you, sometimes even in a personal nature, and blame you for everything. But I think where we had the opportunity to come together is find a way to better understand each other. So if you understand what the role is, or as you say, education, you understand, how your elected official works, what they're supposed to do, what their role is supposed to be in this government. I think you get a better perspective of them and you're able to understand why they make the decisions they make. Now, that's not for everybody. Let me say that.
And that leads to the natural next question of your father.
Yeah.
Your father, elected official.
Yeah.
You witnessing that. And this is a different viewpoint of you, this is your pops. You know what I'm saying? So how were you watching him navigate in this place and space? And how did that impact you? So that's part A of this question. And part B of that is now how cognizant are you with your wife, your brothers and sisters, and others because there's so many other stakeholders that pour into
Yeah.
Red Durhal. I
No
remember
doubt.
Mr. Payne came up to me like, "Yo, you need to," and
Yeah,
I
that's
was
my
like,
brother.
"Yo," I was like, "It's gonna happen, man. I know, I know.
That's my brother though, man.
It's
That's my
coming."
brother.
But I feel that. But
Yeah.
how were you witnessing some of that
Yeah.
in the people's feelings about your father, where you felt like maybe they had him out of context or not
Yeah.
understanding his vision or his work or his efforts? How did you take that?
So I'll tell you, the relationship with me and my dad uh, has always been very interesting. Like my dad is my guy. All right,
Mhm.
that's like my best friend in the whole wide world. But I remember when I was coming and decided I really wanted to fully dedicate my life to public service and run for state rep. I had that conversation with him, and my dad, he got it old school. Like around Coleman Young's era, they got that knowledge old school, right? And he gave it old school too. He gave it old school to me. I remember riding up to Lansing. I shadowed my dad for about 5 years, man. I used to sit on the house floor, sit in committees, soaking all of that up, gaining all that institutional knowledge. And I was working for free, by the way. It was like one of the toughest internships you could ever have, but it really cultured me and turned me into the legislator I am today. But I remember as you're growing and it became closer to my time to get ready to run, and he was becoming term limited and he was on his way out. You know, at the time I was a lot more liberal than my dad. You know what I mean? I'm young, I'm full of energy, I'm a lot more liberal than him. And I remember there would be some decisions that he's making. I said, man, I don't agree with that. I think that's the wrong decision. And I remember him saying at the time, he said, when you become the rep, you can make the decisions that you want to make. I'm the rep. I'm making these decisions with the best information that I have, that even though you're with me every day, you may not even have, or you don't have all the information on this particular subject that I have. Uh, and there's a famous picture. I say it's famous because for me, it's got me and my dad on the house floor, and we were going back and forth as I was sitting next to him on his chair. And we were talking about at the time the bankruptcy here
Mhm.
in the city of Detroit. And my dad had one of the bills in Detroit's bankruptcy in a grand bargain. Uh, and I remember talking to him. I said, "Why would you sponsor one of those bills?" And he didn't necessarily at the time, that wasn't him saying that he wanted to do it, but that was the situation where we were. And I think I didn't understand at the time that there were so many different changes that were made even to the bill that he had, right? To make sure it could do the least amount of harm. Because we didn't have a legislature at that time. And Democrats weren't in control. So he was working to soften the blow. And had it maybe been another Democratic representative that wasn't from the city of Detroit, Detroit's bankruptcy might have been a little bit more harsher. And it was harsh, by the way.
Very harsh.
When we talk about balancing this budget, and coming out of bankruptcy off the backs of residents, off the backs of city workers, right? Um, and I remember him saying, I'm not necessarily excited about this, but it's something that has to be done. And I look now as Detroit, and we're just getting out of budget now, 12 consecutive balanced budgets here in the city, and we're on the road to being even more fiscally stable than we ever have been. You say, wow, that was a decision that he made that was very unpopular, and it was tough.
Mhm.
And that's why you got to have tough, thick skin. And but I remember talking to him, and particularly about, we were talking about retirees, and I had quickly forgot that my dad was a city of Detroit retiree.
Mm.
So his pension was affected.
Mm.
And I remember thinking to myself, I can't imagine having to make a decision even when your money is getting ready to be affected.
Yeah, and I'm one of those voices that was adamantly against that. As you know, my
Yeah.
godmother, Joanne Watson, another Russell
Yeah.
Woods person, always was uplifting the lack of revenue sharing connected to shout out to Anthony Adams for really breaking that down of what happened with the non-resident tax and so much money that the state of Michigan has owed the city of Detroit since the Archer administration.
Yeah.
And it just carries on.
It balloons. You know, I talked about that in a recent interview somewhere else, and they asked me about revenue sharing. And, you know, me having experience as a state representative, I served as a ranking Democrat on House Appropriations my second term in the House. In the first term, I served as the ranking Democrat over the General Government Subcommittee, where revenue sharing and all 9 state departments fall under that. And I remember at the time talking about revenue sharing, or in this past interview, talking about revenue sharing and what Detroit was owed. You know, did Detroit ever get its fair share of revenue sharing? And the answer was it never had. You know, even when you look in 1994, you look at the Headley Amendment, you know, where our state pretty much and our city as well, revenues became dependent on collecting property tax revenue. And in exchange for some of these trade-offs, we were supposed to get statutory revenue sharing that would help us fund basic city services, general services, police, fire, EMS. And Detroit never got their fair share, like over 20 years. Now, that was a key component adding to the bankruptcy here in the city of Detroit. Bad bonding helped with that as well, and the high interest rates on some water bonds that came out of New York. But when you add all of those things together, it put our city in a fiscal tailspin. But I think it spoke to a lot of how, and it speaks to even where we're at now, how important it is to have leadership that can deliver from Lansing, and push the envelope in Lansing. Right, I know Lansing because I've been there. I've sat on that House floor, and even though we were trying to do things for the city of Detroit, there would be representatives that say, I have Detroit fatigue. You know, I remember one of my most difficult speeches that I gave up there was urging the Republican-led legislature at that time to help out Detroit public schools. A lot of folks forget we got DPSCD from DPS.
Yes.
Right. And we're talking about the state gave $700 million to be able to resolve some of that debt. But it was nearly not enough to help our kids and really put them on a path of not just resolving issues from the school system in the past, but really putting them on a great path for them to even grow and be successful and come out of it. You know, sometimes we think if you just wipe the slate clean, everything will be fine. It's like, no, you got to set up parameters so we never get to this spot again. But I remember giving that speech, right? And I didn't even write the speech. I'm speaking from my heart. It's online. It's on YouTube. You can find it. Me talking about the final passage of those bills and holding back tears, man, because I went to this school, you know, school system. You know, I went to a school where we had outdated textbooks that had old presidents in there, where, you know, it was water dripping on us from the ceiling. You couldn't wear that nice Coogee sweater that you begged for, you know what I mean, for Christmas, because there was rust leaking from one of the pipes that would have ruined that sweater, right? You know, sometimes it being cold in classrooms. And the most disheartening thing at the time was to be a person in power as a state legislator. And you're pretty much helpless and at the whim of other people making decisions for your own community, man. It was rough, man.
Because it takes that consensus. It's going to take majority.
That's right.
And getting that majority, as I often say, you know, said this before, Detroit is different. I've been a truck driver before throughout the state of Michigan. So you got Detroit and you got Michigan. I don't necessarily know if it's a versus, but like until you get to like this part of the mitten, you're not understanding a lot of the cultural functionality where it's a lot of cities where the minute that you walk into that town, the Black population has gone up exponentially.
Kari, let me tell you, man, I was the assistant Democratic leader, and we were working to take the House back.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've knocked doors across this entire state. I've been to places that most folks from Detroit never heard of or know of. Paw, Parchment, like, places around this state that are not common cities that folks know about.
No.
And I always tell this story. I'm an assistant Democratic leader at the time. I'm out with the Democratic leader at the time. Shout out to Tim Grimel, who is the mayor of Pontiac now, running for Congress. We were knocking doors. He was on one side of this complex, and I'm on the other side of the complex, right? And I'm knocking doors, and somebody called the police on me.
Oh, I believe it.
And here's the thing. This is what's interesting. I'm a sitting state representative, the assistant Democratic leader of the House. They called the police. The police rolled up and said, "What are you doing out here?" And I said, "Well, I'm canvassing."
Mm-hmm.
And he says, "Well, you can't be canvassing." And I'm looking at a door that has 3 or 4 flyers on the door where somebody has canvassed. I said, "So I can't be canvassing out here?" And it was, little things like that sometimes serve as a reminder and a wake up call that as far as we have come, we still got a long way to go.
Oh man, I was definitely the black guy. Sometimes driving into towns just in my truck, it's like they would say, "Well, I know where you going."
Right. That's right.
It's like, okay, so that means that they know the hotel I'm sleeping.
Yeah.
They know that you're that.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, I know where you're going, buddy. But that was one of the cool things about that. Like, eventually we ended up getting like all the black cities, and a lot of the other white drivers got like the white cities. So it would be rare. It would be rare because I'm sure that's how they felt in Dayton, Ohio.
Yeah.
But I was in Dayton, like, know.
But it changes your perspective. But then you go to certain communities and it's cool.
It's definitely all dependent. Some of it is back to Nas. People fear what they don't understand, hate what they can't conquer.
That's right.
So a lot of that misunderstanding and where it stands, and then depending upon what's moving, because clearly the phone call and in that fear we've seen it go far, because it's good that was a peaceful situation, because it could go left. It could be a learning situation. It all really depends on those personalities and what's happening.
Yeah.
And now I guess getting closer to a close here, and that's why I always uplift. Detroit is different, is a different experience. This isn't going to be like many other podcasts, because it's a lot about a person's story. We got to the political space, but also in this same political space, now I have to ask really about this time in the city that you see for your children. And a lot of the discussion points about what's happening in the city, I often think macro. So it's not just the city, it's the state and the nation itself as a whole. Like, as much as Detroit is different, this is a different America.
No doubt.
And you could say it's always different. Nah, it's very different when we think of really a lot of what you spoke to, the housing situation.
Yeah.
And the probability of a person owning a home. So as much as this is a challenge that Detroiters are taking on, American politicians are being led with this same discussion. And what do you see when you look at your children that are very young? Where do you see things going? Do you see it just being like an AI and technology? What do you see as like just those opportunities if you're looking, 20, 30 years ahead for Detroit?
Yeah, man. What I would say is there's a level of concern, as a father. Daughter is 8 years old. My son will be 2. In a month. She'll be 9 in next month.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's concerning a little bit when we talk about what's happening in politics, what's happening at government, what's happening with housing, what's happening at jobs, what's happening with DEI, or whatever the case may be. It becomes a bit concerning. Education is paramount here. And as a government, I think we've got to do a better job of, kind of defining the scope of how we provide that level of education, particularly in urban, areas around the state, around the country, right?
Mhm.
I always think about education because I think about reading levels, right? Most folks who come in contact with the criminal justice system don't read above a third grade reading level, right? Or don't have a high school diploma or a GED equivalent. And the question becomes, are we preparing our children? What are we doing on the government side to connect them to resources that they need? Now, that being said, we got a lot of bright children here in the city of Detroit that are reading above a third grade reading level. But to your question, what are those opportunities going to be when we get them through middle school and then get through high school and then they get through college? What are they going to come home to? Are they going to be able to come back to our city? You know, and even if they don't come back to our city, if they go somewhere, are there going to be jobs there that are helping them uh, build the life that they want to live and the life you want them to live? And so when I look here in the city of Detroit, particularly at our workforce, the levels of industry that we have, we've got to evolve, right? I think we've got to start at an earlier age talking about the path. I said it in one of his commercials I did. I said, I'm trying to create the path that leads to colleges and careers and not cages and caskets.
Hmm.
You know, and what that takes is understanding the strength of our children, understanding our responsibility. But I think this next generation, you know, as much as folks talk about them, they're more brilliant than we ever were.
Mm.
They have access to more resources that we had. If you look at, my son who's almost 2 years old, when he grabs my phone, right, and he's not even 2 yet, but he grabs my phone and the passcode comes up. He knows to turn the phone around and put it towards my face so I can open the phone. And I didn't teach him that, but they're becoming more entwined with technology. Now, that being said, where my other concern becomes is I think this generation is a lot different from you and me. You and me are closer in age. I think there, in some senses, sometimes a sense of entitlement
Mm.
that exists. And that's not just on them. I try to be careful as a parent. It's that old saying, we try to focus on so much on giving them the things that we didn't have that we forget to give them the things that we did have. Like, struggle is not a bad thing.
And,
Struggle teaches you how to hustle. It teaches you perseverance.
and I also think that resolving, as I often uplift,
Mhm.
I had a great interview not too long ago. The L is a lesson.
Yeah,
So taking that on can only develop character
that's right.
because it's how you function and learn how to problem solve. I believe in the Eastern philosophy, in crisis comes opportunity.
Yeah.
It's just how you look at where you go. And even at the time right now, I think that turning back and looking at community,
Yeah.
because that's really in
The
with the work
village.
I do. Yeah. And how can we uplift where community functions and what that looks like with so many more renters on my block now and
Yeah.
seeing where my garden stands. Now it's cool and it's functional, but now it becomes even more of a different type of space as I meet with a lot of people that's not even speaking English. You know what I'm saying? ESL residents right here on the block. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah.
So
The neighborhoods are changing. We
Mhm.
started this conversation. We were talking about my family, the roots, right?
Yeah.
And the roots, we're talking about communities. As I'm running for mayor, at the forefront of my decision is to bring back that family familial feel here in the city. And not just the feel, but actually repopulate our neighborhoods, repopulate our communities and make it a place for families. Right.
Mhm.
Um, that village concept is important because, you know, things that you do, other organizations do, you definitely need folks to wrap their arms around our youth, right? But also the parents and also each other. But we want to create a city here where families can thrive. I tell folks what I want for my family, I want for every other family. And that's not to say that we perfect or we the you know, we ain't. This is not an episode of the Cosby's or Family Matters or whatever. All the time. But I got an amazing wife, man. Beautiful sister who put herself through law school. And is doing some tremendous things. Two brilliant, bright, amazing kids, right? But I do worry, like, what kind of city are we building for them? Right? Is it going to be safe? Is it going to be clean? Are we going to have neighborhoods that they can move back in and they can say, you know, this is where my dad grew up. This is where my dad went to school. I think about that. I think about those things, man. I ride past like Guyton Elementary on the east side. I was over there because I was in the community talking to some residents not too long ago, and the elementary school I went to was boarded up. Right? Spain is still good.
Yeah.
DSA, the high school I went to, the old one is not there anymore. No. They got the new one.
That right now is a field.
Yeah, and it's it's a field, right? Where my grandmother's house stood is a field, and that neighborhood, a couple other fields over there went down, right? When you think about those things, say, what is our connection to history? That those are the type of things I want to bring back here, right? Bring back the strength of families. I understand how important it is because that's what keeps me going. That's what gets me out of the bed in the morning. My wife, my kids, and then after that, what can I do to help others and create an environment where we all can have the same thing.
All right, so I got two more questions for you before I get to the classic Detroit is Different ending questions. So the first one starts with this. Running for mayor.
Yeah.
It's bold. I believe it takes millions of dollars to win a campaign like this. From the outside in, looking at it, just looking at campaign financing and where things stand. You're stepping into this role after Mayor Duggan, 3 consecutive terms in office, also first white mayor in forever, so that plays a role because race for show matters in Detroit. Cornel West, shout out to him. And when you make this decision, what's your mindset? How do you go into it? Who's your counsel? Who are you talking to? What is like, I'm doing this?
Yeah, man, my dad, I had a conversation with him. Not necessarily in this order, because when you get married, you need to talk to your wife first, man. I talked to my wife. I consulted my wife, and it's a risky thing. I'm a member of the Detroit City Council now. I'm not bragging, but I think we have done such a great job in my district that if I wanted to run for that seat again, we win with a very great margin. We have done so much in that district to reconnect our folks to resources. We built housing there. We got 2 new rec centers where we had 0. We've got jobs that have come to that district, and we helped eliminate a lot of the apathy and brought my district together. So I that weighed heavy on me because I love the residents of District 7. I spent a lot of time with them, man. At coffee hours, political education course, all that stuff.
You was doing a lot of coffees at McDonald's and bouncing around even to I forget the place on Dexter.
And Harmony Cafe, man.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. Shout out to them. Shout out to 2 business owners, Key and Ty, who are the success story that we want for Black families here in the city, right? But I had to talk to the wife. And I say, this is a risky thing, right? This is something that's not guaranteed. A lot of hard work got to be put into this. You are put under an even higher level of scrutiny. And it is a marathon, not a sprint.
So And me kind of knowing you, I've known you're definitely so. So one thing I know you definitely doing is putting on the walking shoes and knocking.
You know it.
You are one of the most canvassing people I've seen.
Don't tell them that though. I want them to underestimate it, man. I want them to think that he's just got this suit on all the time. That's what I want them to think.
But that conversation with yourself.
Yeah.
What was the conversation with yourself to say yes?
Yeah. So I tell folks, man, I'm not a suicidal guy, man. I'm not gonna give up, something that may be easier to win if I don't understand the veracity or the importance of what I'm doing. The conversation I had with myself is, you hear me talk about District 7. What I want for that district, I want every single district here in the city of Detroit. And we're in a very vulnerable time here in the city. So, there's going to be a transition. The next mayor is not going to be the most popular mayor in the world, right? Because you're going to have to tell a lot of folks, no, we don't have $827 million of ARPA funding. Budget is starting to become status quo and normalized. Tight decisions are going to have to be made. We got a federal government that's going to be a little bit different. State government that's going to be a little bit different. And so the question I ask myself, are you up for the task? Not just the running part, right? We focus on the running part a lot because that's what you got to do to get there. But, you have to ask yourself those questions. If I get there, can we run this city? And I know we can. And I looked at all of the experiences that I've had over my life that have led me to where I am now and saying, wow, this was preparing me for this and this was preparing me for this. And then you ask yourself the question, because your sacrifices become even more. You got a 2-year-old son, or who will be 2. You got a daughter that's getting ready to be 9 years old. You're going to be running around a lot as the mayor. And I remember, though, just thinking for a second, like, wow, but these are some of the same things that my dad did.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that man and respect him so much because it's one thing to care for just your family, but it's another thing to care for the entire village, to sacrifice for yourself and the village. Because here's the thing. You could just sacrifice for your family all day long and say, you know what, my son, he's not going to be hanging out on these streets, right? But if he can't walk down the street because we didn't take the chance to talk to another person's child who may not have had the same experiences my child has, and then something happens to my child, we failed my child and that child because we all one. It goes back to what you said. We're all community.
Yeah.
What I want for my son, I want for everybody else's son. And I want to build a city for my son, who is a young Black man, where he can grow up and not have the fear of violence. I want to build a city for my daughter, who will grow up and come back here and will have opportunity as a young Black woman, right? Where she can start to build a family. And then, I ain't wrapping my mind around this yet, but also meet a nice young man, hopefully from the city of Detroit here, that she can marry, that has been led on that same type of path. That's what we talk about when we talk about generations to come. So when I sat there and I asked myself those questions, I said, we got to do this, right? And that's no knock at anybody else that's running. I got some respect for a lot of the candidates that are running. Mm-hmm. It's just that I know they have different experiences and not the experience that we have.
I definitely feel that, which comes with the next question. Maybe about a month and a half ago, one of another person's father, very close, rest in peace, Chokwe Antoine Lumumba, sat in that chair, Mayor Jackson, Mississippi.
That's my brother.
Good
brother.
Along with Chokwe Antoine, I remember when Charlie Beckham, love Charlie Beckham.
Yeah, Charlie too.
Sat in this studio too. And so many other mayors across America. And when we think about Black leadership in positions of influence, especially when those positions of influence control the resources of money, mm-hmm. land, and assets like water.
Yeah.
It comes with a heavy hand from this government. Charlie Beckham says when Coleman Young left office, I want to say like something like 800,000 pages of an FBI dossier where they didn't find anything. But that means that the minute that Coleman Young steps into office, the FBI creates a whole Coleman Young task force. And I mean, this is at the time, I mean, it was a Martin Luther King task force, a Malcolm X task force, God knows. I mean, what goes on, just positions in Black leadership. And this nation's relationship with that, especially from that executive position. And it's going to be more of these investigations and charges being brought up from federal agencies into executive administrations across the nation, Black leadership. So it's also a framing of like what Black leadership is and it's and I'm speaking from the media lens, quote unquote ineptitude or not in the right forms of leadership. You got a whole thing going on in the nonprofit sector right now in the city of Detroit too. And it's just the face of like, look at this Black leadership. Look at this corruption. Those things that go hand in hand.
Yeah.
That pressure is real.
Yeah. But, you know, they say pressure busts pipes or pressure makes a diamond. For me, in my career, in politics, in public service, one of the things that has always been important to me, let me say two of the things that have always been important to me. The first one is to set the tone and remind folks that Blacks can lead. I came in as the assistant Democratic leader of the House in the Michigan legislature at about 30 years old, out of 110 representatives, right? And we showed from day one that we could lead. Even being elected, first of all, you become a leader, so you're held to that scrutiny. But lead in a caucus where it's not that many folks that look like you, right? Lead with integrity, lead with experience, lead with intelligence, lead with institutional knowledge, and lead with compassion as well. The stigma that exists that Blacks can't lead, whether that's on the state level, federal level, city level, county level, whatever the case may be, is a stigma that folks will always try to attach, right? But you got to eliminate it.
And along with that, I'm just saying, I think it's real. I'm one of those that think that this nation has targeted Black leadership immediately when taking on office.
Yeah.
To create that stigma, to create that stereotype, so we don't have Black leadership.
Well, I think folks who have been in this space, Black folks who have been elected leaders, have been held in some aspects to a higher level of scrutiny than some others. But my message always is you have to keep your people in mind first and foremost, right? You have to make sure that you are doing everything that you can to be above reproach and try to be 10 times better than anyone else. And let me tell you what I mean by when I say that. You have to, if you understand that the microscope is on you and you're the ant, okay, look for the microscope and don't run under the sun. You got what I'm saying? So if you know these things are happening, you have to move different. You have to move in a way where even though it may seem unfair, you have to move so you work to eliminate that stigma. So for me, and that was leading to my second point, the reason why it is important to be a leader with integrity is not just you and your reputation. It's the reputation of those who come behind you. I remember our first, and I'll just be honest, I remember first running for office.
I mean, the Mayor Kilpatrick thing still kind of looms to this day.
I was knocking doors in 2014, 2015. No secret, Mayor Kilpatrick at the time, who was a state rep, same district that we served, my dad served in. He was a predecessor to his aunt, and before that, then my dad came after his aunt. You know, as a young black man knocking on their doors, a lot of folks said, "I vote for you. Don't be like Kwame." And you got to carry that, right? For whatever the case is, whatever he did, whatever he didn't do, they didn't know me, but that was the thing. That was one of the first things they said.
The face of young black leadership.
Do you understand what I'm saying? And so, and that's not wasn't in a white neighborhood. It's in a black neighborhood. What I'm saying is, you have to lead in a way where you start to push and change that narrative and change that stigma. Because one of the things that you also want to do while you're, on your path to leadership, or you're walking down that path, you got to have a goal to eliminate the apathy that exists in our communities, right? Folks feel like their government has forgotten about them.
Very much
They
so.
feel like every politician or every public service every public servant is a crook. They feel like all you guys do is talk and you don't deliver. And so for me, I've been very pointed at doing a couple things. One of the first things is to be honest. I'm not going to tell you I can do something that I can't do. I would rather underpromise and overdeliver than the opposite. The second thing is, and actually this is the first thing, let me say this. The first thing I always say is, I ain't going to jail for nobody. The only silver bracelet I wear is the one my kids bought me, and this watch.
And it's a lot of brothers and sisters that felt that way.
And look, I know they felt that way, but
I think a lot of them didn't do nothing.
I'm telling you, I don't play those games. Even right now, if I sensed it was something nefarious, I'm not hanging with you, man. I got too much to lose. I love my wife, and although my wife is an attorney, you get in some trouble like that, she ain't gonna represent you, man. But I say that to say, you always got to work 10 times as harder, and it ain't fair. But you always have to be, above pros. And then you also got to understand one thing that sticks with me, that this kind of a foundation for me. My dad said this to us as a kid. He said, "Son, never forget that the only person you're better than is the person that you used to be." So I carried that, noting that I'm not above the law. I carried that, noting that I always had to be the best person that I can be, and be better than the man that I was the day before. And continue that, going on. And I also carry that, noting that you have to understand the greatness in others. You don't look down upon anyone else, but you lead by example. And that's the key. We got to lead by example. When somebody tells me we can't do something, I like to be the person to say, yes, we can. Now we're going to be realistic, but yes, we can. So if you say blacks can't lead here in the city of Detroit, I'm saying, yes, we can. And yes, we do. Because it has happened. The first black mayor in the city of Detroit, one of the greatest mayors, with all the controversy that may have been thrown at him, or whatever the case may be.
Very much so.
Right? The greatest mayor I've known. And I'm telling you, that's my personal belief. That's the greatest mayor that I've known. And when I tell you just the strength and courage that it took, even through a difficult time, I mean, you got to remember, he came up after stress.
Yeah.
He came up after, the big four. He came up, look, he came up in some real tough times after the riots, and had to rebuild the city, the crack epidemic. You watch a documentary from Mary Young. It's called "Detroit is on Fire." Like, go look that up. And it was a national interview. I think it was Nightline, and they were asking him about Detroit, and he stood and still fought, so much that he cussed at him, told him to get out of his office.
Yeah.
But again, now when we're running for mayor and you ask that question, we're gonna need that type of strength.
I definitely applaud that effort, and thank you so much for sharing, because that is a question that and you've come on before it was even public comment. We've had
Yeah.
this exchange through the political forum, and I'm gonna still welcome you on for that, which is different than this Detroit is different discussion, which I think this fits a Detroit is different discussion more so because this is Kari Frazier, and I'm gonna say this is Detroit is different. Knowing the relationship of this nation and Black leadership, it is going to be, it's more than a microscope. Like, I mean, to just know that an FBI office is immediately going to be built around trying to find anything, anything that can be sort of looked at as nefarious or pieced together or what could be brought up, that's going to happen. And then the more waves you make that are empowering of people, the more and more that's going to shift things. Because that's what it is. It's like as Coleman Young got more active, empowering people, and people started supporting him more of those task force started. And not just Coleman Young. I mean, this is Maynard Jackson. This is Marion Barry. This is Willie Brown. This is Amiri Baraka. Like, you just look across the nation. Harold Washington, even before he's passing. Like, the relationship between the FBI files and Black lead. I mean, let's put it like this. The FBI starts because of Marcus Garvey.
Yeah. And here's the thing. We acknowledge those things have happened, but I also look at you, and they may have files on them too. But we've also got to be quick to remind folks of folks who are successful, like Keisha Lance Bottoms, right? Like many other, Maxine Waters. I mean, you can go on and on with some great leaders that have never really, quote unquote, been caught in the scandal, even though they were under the microscope.
And I'm not even saying the scandal. I'm just more so saying like that heat is coming.
Oh yeah,
so it's like navigating it. I mean, there's so many people that I think navigated for like masterfully. I mean, when we talk about it, I mean, Carolyn Cheeks Kilpatrick, which was I think one of the most brilliant legislators we've seen. Like so, like we've seen that navigation function. Ken Cockrell Sr. The list can go on. I'm just saying that happens in that leadership position.
Yeah, but again, you got to you got to realize that microscope is on you.
Yep,
and that again, you got to be 10 times more safe, 10 times more thoughtful about what you say and what you do. I walked. First of all, you got to remember how I got on council. Right, I'm technically in my second term. I took over when the former council member, my predecessor, which I'm not going to get into, resigned.
Yeah.
Right. So I walked into a district where, again, the apathy was high, the trust was low.
Very much so.
Folks were concerned. Folks had been investigated. I walked into my office in city council on day one. The phone jacks was hanging out the walls. Okay. But in order to restore that faith, in order to continue to eliminate a narrative that exists here in this city, across this country, or even in the world, you gotta stay focused. You gotta be there for what you're there for. I never ran for office thinking that I was gonna be rich. I already knew. How did I know? Because
your dad.
My dad. We weren't poor, as folks would like to say. Folks don't like to use the word poor anymore, but we weren't in poverty, or we weren't, unfortunate in a lot of ways. But we weren't rich, right? We still had tough times. We didn't have some of the other things that a lot of our folks that we knew that were in politics or were children of other public servants had, right? So I knew you going to the public service, you're not going to be rich. Not in a form of financial or monetary stability, but what you're going to be rich in is knowing that you provided a service for your people. And my litmus test when I go home at night, if I can look myself in the mirror and be happy with what I see, I know that I've done the job that I've been blessed by God to do.
I love it. So now we close. Classic ones. This is a fast one. Very first car. Year, make, and model. Year you got it.
1993 Pontiac Grand Am.
Okay.
I got it in 2001.
Okay.
It cost $300. It was a neighbor's car. We call it the Batmobile because it looked like somebody hit it with a bat like 30 times.
Hilarious.
Yeah, white. But it was dope, man. I bought the little tape where you hooked it to the little the Discman CD player.
The CD kit?
Yeah, man. I look, you couldn't tell me nothing. So much that I hadn't had my license yet, so I couldn't drive it, but it was parked in the back. And every day I got home from school, I used to just go back in there, and me and my friends, we sit in there and rap or do whatever, and then the battery ran out.
Hilarious.
But yeah, that was my first car.
The Batmobile. I love it.
Batmobile.
Where's the first place you went when you got your license and could go?
Oh man, I think. Well, first of all, the gas station. I'm gonna tell you that because when we bought that car, it didn't have that much gas. When we brought it from our next door neighbor, the Lions, that lived next door to us on Broad Street, man. I went to the gas station, and then I went to either Fairlane or Northland. I can't remember, but I went to the mall.
Okay,
I went to the mall. I remember that. I got my friends in the car, man. We went and got some gas. Went and got some quarter juices, some chips, and then we went to the mall, man.
Classic Detroit story right there.
Yeah.
All right, and for people that don't know, back in the day, gas was, man,
$1.19, I think. $1.19.
Oh man.
Yeah,
those were the days.
Yeah, those were the days.
All right, you're the DJ at the end of the fireworks, Woodward and Jefferson. You get to play 2 songs. What songs you playing?
Man, that's a tough one, man. Man, that's a tough one. I would say, "What More Can I Say?"
Okay.
By Jay-Z.
Okay.
One of my favorite songs. And the other one probably Ain't No Mountain High Enough. The Diana Ross version, though, not Marvin and Tammy Terrell. The Diana Ross version, because
I like
it's just the instrumentation in that one is just a little bit. The orchestration is a little bit.
Yeah, the music it has more depth and character. Like, no offense to Marvin and Tammy. Marvin and Tammy make it more like a duet.
That's right.
Whereas Diana Ross makes it more like a...
This is an epic show.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's the dun, dun, it's like
string,
it's the hits.
I like epic show.
Yeah.
Like one of those songs that be like at the end or the start of like a James Bond movie or something.
Yeah, and she laid it out in there. She got her she has commentary in there. She's like my love is a flower. Like she you know what I mean? So it's like it's something that grabs you. It's something that's epic, man. But that's a hard question though, because I'm a musician.
Mm-hmm.
But those 2 songs, man, those are songs I love.
Okay, and then here we go. Last one. You could rename Woodward after one Detroiter. Who would it be and why?
Wow, man, that's a tough one. I got 2 answers because I'm biased. I would always throw my dad up there, man, and I always say that, man, because my dad is a workhorse and has been a workhorse for so many years. And to be honest, man, and in so many ways, man, I don't feel like he's gotten the recognition that he should have gotten. And probably because in some aspects he wasn't a cool kid. My dad wasn't a kid. He don't go out and drink with you. My dad didn't smoke. My dad was like, as they say, a L7.
Hilarious.
You know what I mean? My dad was really a square. But, I always throw my dad up there. Coleman Young obviously would be, an obvious one, but his name is so much, across this city. But, I to be honest, man, and this might be a little bit controversial, this might be just a tad bit controversial. But I would say John Conyers, man. Even though he's got a secondary street sign named after him, but if you took you're not talking secondary street sign, right? Or you talking about just...
No, I'm talking about like
it's not going to be called Woodward no more.
I'm talking about like, okay, let's take this slave
Woodward
owner.
Yeah. I know what you're saying. Yeah. So I would say John Conyers, man. you know, and folks may think that's a little bit controversial, but I think a lot of us forget what he really meant. You know what I mean? He was the dean at one time of Congress. That's the longest serving member and the only black man in the history of Congress, man, to
Mhm.
achieve that, right? And so you talk like 30, 40, 50. Look, John Conyers was so fire. I remember I asked somebody at one time, I said, you want to know how powerful John Conyers is and what he means to not just Detroit and the country? They said, well, what you mean, Fred? I said, have you ever seen a John Conyers lawn sign? And they say, yeah. I said, well, what does it say? They're like, it says Conyers. I said, does it say what he's running for? They're like, no, it doesn't. I say, because his name is synonymous to Congress. Think about that.
Mm.
He didn't even have to put what he's running for. He just put his last name on there. You knew what time it was. I think the further we go on in history, we forget people's contributions.
I agree with you. And, as a Northwestern guy, and I got so many John Conyers stories to share, but yeah, shout out to the chairman. So many things. And then you talk about the lawn sign. Shout out to Mays Printing too. Another
Mays
one of them
Printing,
people. Just the rich history
yeah.
of how we look at it in all of those stories. Boy. And I like that. That would be so Detroit to have that.
That would be, I think, indicative of Detroit. And it'd be kind of cool because, Conyers ran against Coleman at one time.
Oh, yeah, I definitely do.
But they were like two of the most powerful leaders,
Mhm.
black leaders that we had in this city. And to, see Coleman in the Municipal Center there and then see Conyers there, kind of meeting up again, kind of in some way like that, man. That would be interesting, man.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Thank
you
you.
so much. This was a rich interview and best in the run, the election, and everything that's going to grow from this.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you, man. And listen, thank you for having me on. Shout out to those West Side Cubs. I see that shirt again, man.
Yes, sir.
But thank you for what you do, man. Let me say just really quick, I said this before. You were kind of doing this when it wasn't even popular. Like podcasts have taken off. I remember when you were just starting in the podcast. I remember coming to the studio. You didn't have the leaves on the wall and all that stuff, man. So you're really doing a great job, and I think you're doing a great job of telling our story, man, in a very authentic way. And I want to thank you for that, man.
Well, thank you so much. And that definitely carries and means a lot. And seeing what's grown of this, I would just hope that these rich stories and these archives continue to carry and people know that, yeah, we're going to get topical and it's definitely a lot of sensational stuff out here. But this rich, full conversation, though you may just watch the reel, it does exist.
It does.
All right. Peace.
Peace.